Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko chami toku ingoa. Good morning, everyone. What a privilege to be in the same room as all of you. We're progressing the discussions on day 2 of the Energy and Innovation Wānanga. It's been a stimulating day yesterday, and I'm sure we're going to have stimulating conversations today as well. It's really encouraging to see all of the discussions that have happened that we are going to now be able to formulate into some sort of action plans and take our region forward. So I have been tasked to chair the regional plans and priorities session of the Wānanga, and I am thrilled to be sharing the stage with our expert speakers. So I've got Bobby Brown, Steve Canny, Mervyn English, Lyndon Preble, and Richard Gray. But before I hand over to our presenters, I would like to briefly describe to you what we do at Great South. Now, we had a great discussion just now about regional leadership. Great South is really Southland's regional development agency. But what does that mean? I don't think that laugh was for me. We are a council-controlled organisation, so we do have several shareholders, obviously the 4 councils. We also have SIT, the Chamber of Commerce, ILT, MLT, and our member company, the Community Trust of Southland. But we also have a proud agreement with and a strong working relationship with our 4 Papatiku Runaka. And we're extremely grateful for the guidance and support that they provide us. They're pulled in all directions, and we know that they conduct an immense amount of mahi for all of us on behalf of our region. Our vision is to enable greater lives through sustainable development. Now, we are here to achieve the objectives of our shareholders, both commercial and non-commercial. We are here to do this by being socially and environmentally responsible. We provide regional leadership. We look at opportunities to diversify the economy and support business growth. We promote the region through visitor attraction, events, and attraction and retention of skilled workers. We support environment and climate change actions by working alongside Southland businesses with carbon emission abatements while leading Southland's journey to net zero. So we are an innovative business. We think outside of that box. We look at opportunities and we develop and design ways on how to make those opportunities into real businesses. This has led us to establishing and owning space operations. Space Ops, as most of you will know, is a satellite ground station that is based down in Awarua, in Bluff. And Space Ops actually places Murihiku Southland on the map by providing antenna hosting and leasing services to international space communities. Now, what other region does that? Space Ops has the opportunity to develop new businesses that has exponential growth that will benefit all of us in Murihiku Southland. We are also extremely excited at the prospect of New Zealand Functional Foods going ahead. And we've got Roger and Marianne from that organisation here today. For those unfamiliar with what that is, it's the proposed oat milk factory, which we currently own 49% shares of. These shares represent our IP, our vision, and our tireless efforts to bring new and distinctly unique businesses to our region. And how is this unique, you might ask? Well, I'm going to tell you anyway. It is not simply an oat milk factory. New Zealand Functional Foods will be the first oat-led functional foods business to fully utilize the entire plant via a vertically integrated ecosystem that delivers zero waste. It's brought to life by a unique soil-to-sip consumer story. Now, that is innovation, and that's part of why we're here today, to discuss these innovative sort of ideas. Well, that's all from me. I've had my play, plugged in Great South. The leadership discussion affects us quite significantly, as we are here to do the bidding of our shareholders. So the leadership group that we do establish at some point into the future will guide us on how we need to deliver your visions for our future for Southland Moriku. So I welcome Bobby to start her presentation on Beyond 2025.
Yep, all good. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Bobby Brown tuku ingoa, no Muruawai, no Marihukua Hou. My name's Bobby. I am the project lead for a project called Beyond 2025, and I promise I have 5 slides that I'm going to try and whip through and give you a good idea of what this project is. So, what is Beyond 2025? So it has 2 functions. It has one function to be the long-term lens over all the just transitions work streams and projects, so it just makes it look a bit longer. And the second function is to refresh what Tom was talking about before, the Southland Regional Development Strategy from 7 years ago. So that particular piece of work has done a pretty good job in terms of 2/3 of the project either being complete or in process, and things like air connectivity to Auckland, CBD rejuvenation, Milford opportunities are really good projects that have happened. Okay, so all this slide says is that what we've done is we have used lots of different research, so 22 pieces of primary research will inform the plan. Lots of surveys, everybody's over-surveyed, but it's been really important to understand, because of all the change happening, exactly what our people, our place need, and how we incorporate that in our long-term thinking. Rightio, so if nothing else, remember the circle. And we've actually got a document here, which we've got copies, which just gives you a bit of an outline of the vision, the guiding principles, and the key enablers of the project. We will have the project launched on the 28th of June, so that's not too far away. So we're very busy in the write-up stage at the moment. I just want to acknowledge all the partners and stakeholders who've been a part of this process. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle. It's just trying to understand everybody's mahi and how it connects together, because there's lots of good stuff going on. What we've found is that a lot of it's not connected. The second point is that it's very tricky at the moment trying to look very long term, when what we do now will give us an opportunity to influence long term. So thinking of things like workforce challenges, if we provide houses, you'll enable people to be able to live here, so that'll affect population. So it's just putting that out there that, that it's not quite so simple as saying we're going to have this many people live here in the future that will do this. But that's what we love about Southland, because the clear message I've had from all stakeholders is that we want to just get on with it and actually embrace the opportunities and work together to make them happen. So in terms of this circle diagram, what it shows is that we do have a vision, which is based really simply around 3 things: people, economy, and environment. People, we want to make sure that we have a thriving population with happy, healthy people who are proud to be Southlanders. Economy, we want to make sure we remain a powerhouse for New Zealand, and that we do provide diverse and resilient economy that enables jobs and career opportunities for our people. Not that different to what we all know. And the third thing is environment. And with this one, what we are doing are we are respecting and we want to care for our natural environment, acknowledging that it's the source of our prosperity and our way of life. All these things connect together, and that's what we've tried to show. So in the circle, you'll see a couple of layers of other circles around the outside, and there's 5 things called enablers. So we have identified 5 things out of all the research that if we do nothing else, that they will help achieve lots of things. Workforce, energy, regulatory and planning, data, and housing. Really hard to describe what is going to happen in those in 10 seconds, but we'll go into a bit more detail about those ones. And again, they're all complex issues. They will require multi-purpose or multi-stakeholder collaborative approaches. And it's not just going to be, right, let's just do that and it fixes it. There's going to be lots of different pathways forward. The final thing I think I wanted to talk about was energy, and just to show how this fits. So obviously, as I just said, it's one of the key enablers in the plan. For energy, it's more than just about whether Tiwai closes or not, although, as we've heard over the last day, the uncertainty around that is probably the thing that's the most challenging. So understanding where that ends would be good. However, what we've done with the plan is that we've tried to just get on with it, and we've tried to understand possible futures for the region based on industry, based on using our natural strengths from our environment and our place. So what Chami said about the satellite ground stations, we can do that because of our position in the world. So we want to just understand what that means, and then energy requirements, as well as other things like workforce, rules that will enable that. And I guess that's the other point to note, is that this plan, a little bit different to Swords Tom, is that we've taken a more holistic approach. So we will have clear regional development aspirations, and then we'll talk about the rules and what the councils and Nobby and the other mayors will need to enable through their processes and rules to help make it happen. So it's all connected up. Yeah? Okay, so Steve's going to talk in a couple of minutes about the regional energy strategy, and it basically looked at supply and demand. And remember, this planning is here as a tool because it's not just us. Like, we have over 14,000 businesses in the region. We've got 3,500 farms. We've got a population, 2% of New Zealand's population, with 2% of New Zealand's houses. We've got an amazing natural environment. Over 50% of our region is conservation estate, so we've got a responsibility to look after that, but also it's a natural playground that attracts visitors, whether we want them or not. But before COVID, that was up to 700 million in terms of economic benefit for our region. So it's how we balance all this together within the rules and alongside the resources and the collaborative approach that I think we can do down here. Okay, I feel like I'm on time. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, e te neata. Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Stephen Kenny. I'm the Strategic Projects Manager for Great South, and I guess my role is looking out into the future, looking for opportunities and attempting to leverage those opportunities into the region and into our communities. I'm speaking about, contrary to Bobby's point earlier, I'm not speaking specifically about energy today, just generally covering the topic. Mervyn will speak about clean energy shortly, but I'm talking about decarbonisation and climate change effectively. And the first thing I'd say is that at present we're in a period of very significant change. There's no question whatsoever about that. I like this image here because this image tells a story. This image tells a story of an area called Te Wairau Bay that has, you'll see in the foreground, a road that used to run along the foreshore of Te Wairau Bay no longer exists. And this is the impact of sea level rise, sea surge effects and so on. And this is going to be our norm going forward. To better understand our future, we have mapped all our coastlines and so on to look at the impacts, including the coast of Rakiura and so on, so that we can make better decisions into the future. But the reality is this is a period of change. In order to understand our response to that change, we have mapped out a program called Net Zero Southland. This was published in 2021. The work was undertaken in 2020, and it's mapped out how we can achieve net zero by 2050 for every sector and every industry in the region. And been mapped in a way that doesn't create social or economic shock. It's a pathway that can be navigated, but it requires everybody to be part of that navigation. And really, this is an important step for us. Many of our decisions that we make on new industry, placement of assets and various other things will come down to this very, very fact of climate change and what the impacts are likely to be. Just for those who don't know, just expanding on yesterday, Southland produces 15% of all New Zealand's tradable exports, which is really significant achievement as a region. We have an economy of around 7.3 billion, and 70% of our GDP is part of the supply chain and export sector. So we are very exposed to exports, we're very exposed to population, workforce, commodity pricing and so on. So we have to do what we do very, very well, and that's an important part of what we do. But as part of this change, we need to look into the future, as I mentioned earlier. Today, the price of carbon is $53. It's expected to be $140 by 2030 and $250 by 2050. So we have a constantly increasing cost of carbon in more ways than one. There's financial cost, there's consumer decision-making processes that are impacting how people consume and what they consume. For our region, the average consumer is in fact a 25 to 45-year-old female practicing what's known as filial piety. So she's a person who makes decisions, she's a very strong influencer. So we have to, in everything we do, the efficacy of production and so on has to reflect good practice and world best practice at the time. As a region, we are, as mentioned yesterday, we are overexposed to emissions. This is just a fact. It's a fact of a goods producing region, we have high emissions. These emissions really are based around agriculture. 62% of our emissions come from agriculture, 8% from transport, 9.5% from industrial power and thermal energy, and industrial processing 9.4%, and 19.3% comes from stationary energy. As part of navigating this pathway forward, we needed to focus on the areas that are most important to us, and where we can give effect to change very quickly is really part of this whole focus. So you'll see that there's a red dot in the middle of the screen there on the upper right hand. That's our focus on thermal energy and decarbonisation from thermal processing. And that's been our focus since 2015. To date, I won't expand too much, but by 2015 we had 15 of our 190 boilers converted to renewable energy. By 2018 we had 45 boilers converted. Today we have 87 boilers converted, and that pathway continues. And Richard and other industrial processors, the smelter and so on, all have plans to look at decarbonisation moving forward, and really impressive change in that period. So what we did was we mapped out a pathway for reaching our net zero targets by mapping an agricultural pathway. What does this mean for agriculture? Bearing in mind that every sector has to participate. So we've looked at how we might transition to new plantings as offsets. These are always interim opportunities, but marginal and transitional planting, farmland and horticultural cropping, and also farm stock reduction, although that's happening naturally at present as we speak. And I guess from our point of view, we feel that we can reach our target of carbon neutral by 2050, I should say. We have also mapped out the industrial pathway, if you like, or technology pathway. And I guess one of the key things is that we're already seeing this transition occurring, which is very, very exciting to see. The reality, however, moving forward, is that decarbonisation needs renewable energy. No matter what that renewable energy is, we have to get better at using energy, and we have to get better at producing energy, if you like. Because we have to be globally competitive within a New Zealand setting. So that doesn't mean high-cost energy, it means affordable energy moving forward. And I guess as a region, we have progressively, since 2002, developed energy strategies, but we have now almost completed the latest energy strategy. And I think this is the best strategy across the board. We have looked at a granular form of our new load and demand going forward, and we've looked at how we might meet that demand. And as part of that process, what I can really say is southern New Zealand has an abundance of new energy potential. As part of that work, we have looked at we've looked at 114 wind sites, 10 run-of-river hydro sites, inland solar, you name it. And the energy focus that we've brought to bear is around electrons, electricity, biomass, and better recovery of biogenic methane, and so on and so forth. So that all forms part of the process. It's been really great to have 27 people on an advisory group associated with this project, all our rūnanga represented, all our iwi partners around the table, and major stakeholders. So we really acknowledge and are thrilled to have those people on board. I guess what we're going to say is that what we've seen is that there's unprecedented demand for new energy in the region, for decarbonisation, for electricity-based transport, including hydrogen transport, and for just new industry investment. So significant. So we have an abundance, there's a significant demand. Getting the balance between demand and supply is critical for pricing and so on and so forth. I guess what we're looking at here is looking at doing what we do now better. Thinking about emissions in terms of energy and how we apply that more effectively, how we apply this thinking more effectively. I guess from another important point is that we have a dearth of housing and we need to work on our housing stock within the region. We would love to see more insulated, better quality homes being built, and I'm a firm believer in this at a personal level, but the reality is we've got to do better, and we've got to do this more effectively and more cost effectively as well. New technology will inevitably have a pathway to be part of the pathway. We accept that. In terms of our modelling and planning, we've accepted currently bankable technologies with a view towards what might make a step change throughout that process. The other important thing is that moving forward, we have to ensure that our planning is embedded into our RMA and spatial planning processes so that we can speed up consenting processes and we can anticipate the kind of investment that's required. Just a quick touch on where our emissions come from. I think you know that, and I won't labour that completely, but what I can say is that all of our major emitters are part of a process and have been part of a process looking towards decarbonisation for quite some time. And it's really heartening to see that some of these plans are coming forward by 6 years and so on. So this is really positive stuff. Again, you know, we have we're overrepresented in emissions, but the reality is we have a plan, and that's a great step forward. As I mentioned, there's 190 thermal energy processes in the region. You'll see 35 of them there that are committed to current projects, but we expect to have we've got a rolling interest in new decarbonisation projects, and I just want to acknowledge ECA and the government's GIDI fund. It really has created the impetus that's required to get a lot of these projects across the line. Won't bore you to tears. Invercargill City has a major decarbonisation program, and we've got 10 decarbonisation projects involved in that at present, and which Great South is managing. We also have been very active in developing a biomass industry within Southland. Current biomass industry is 195,000 tonnes, but we need to move it to 2.5 times that moving forward to meet the thermal needs of some of our big processes. And that's a reality. And most of this material comes from waste wood, if you like, or low-grade material, and all of the major foresters are on board with this project and actively involved in building the capacity of wood thermal energy process. I won't dwell, there's a lot of numbers there, won't get too carried away, other than to simply say that we've scoped with all the forest owners in Otago Southland or West Otago Southland to identify their harvest and yields going forward and what the potential may be. Just quickly, investment in decarbonisation provides a direct return. To date, we have decarbonised 3.2 million tonnes of carbon out of the system. What does that mean financially? Well, what it means is by 2050, not having that carbon in the system will give our businesses an advantage of almost $750 million annually as a consequence of that kind of avoidance, if you like. So the reality, however, is that there's a lot of factors that come into play. One of the really interesting impacts is, and perverse effects of decarbonisation is this trend towards carbon forest planting, and we've heard about it all around New Zealand. What does it mean in the southern setting? It means very serious change. The triggers for decarbonisation mostly are $50 for land above 15 degrees slope, sheep and beef land, $70 a tonne for carbon, then lowland sheep and beef, good quality production land. At $104 a tonne, poor performing or constrained dairy converts to forest. At $140 a tonne, average dairy converts to forest. That's not a good look for our processors and for our major export industries. Really big effect. But in terms of the regional economics, we can see around 3.77 billion being leaked out of our province as a consequence of carbon forest. We can see losses of jobs and population up to 13,000. So that's not what we want to see. And so what we're urging very strongly in this work is to urge government to put in place regulation and allow local government the tools to act effectively to address this particular issue. It's a whole topic in itself, so I won't go into it too much. The only other important thing is that the conservation estate represents 30% of the total land mass of New Zealand. In our case, in Southland, it's 58%. We're blessed by having wonderful public conservation lands, but you can't plant a native carbon forest in conservation land in New Zealand. We've got to change that. This is a really big problem because, in actual fact, what it would do is create biodiversity and new opportunities for our region, and it would allow DOC to concentrate on the things that it has to do, not managing pest weeds within the conservation estate. And there are parties willing and able to commit to that. Hydrogen, we have been actively involved. Myself personally, I've been 10 years of my working career working on hydrogen-related activities off and on, but in earnest since about 2017. And what we would say is that we have been actively involved. I think we've supported around 11 technical reports to support the Southern Green Hydrogen Project and other related activities in the region. So we see this as a really big part of our forward pathway as a region. And we have the assets and capability to deliver these projects. And as Tom said earlier, you know, they take time. But really, when you look at it fundamentally, there aren't too many barriers apart from market development and infrastructural development that are holding this business opportunity back. So how are we going in terms of our regional performance? Well, we have been measuring our emissions since 2017, and we report annually. I'm very pleased to say that our emissions are declining quite quickly. 421,000 net emissions, and I'll explain the breakdown very shortly. I'm not going to labour it too much, but we're on the right pathway. Our gross emissions as a region are declining. Our forest planting and carbon forest planting is increasing. So we need to be aware of the effects of that. Just a little bit of a stark reality. A big part of our emissions reduction has come about because of stock reductions in our region. So we're down 38,000 dairy cows in the last measured period and 341,000 sheep. That is very, very, very significant. We're up on beef, but the net effect is a reduction, fairly substantial reduction in emissions from livestock within our region. So just briefly, where are we at? 7.6% reduction in emissions as a region, and we're moving at pace to increase that. Agriculture has contributed 214,000 tonnes of reduction. Landfill gas, regionally, we've moved from 30% recovery, regional landfill gas, to 75% recovery. That's making a big difference in our biogenic methane emissions. Stationary engine, we've reduced our emissions by, in fact, we've increased our emissions from stationary engines because of the cost of, because of the carbon entrained in our electricity sector. And that's a really big problem. Strategically, as a country, we've got to get rid of coal out of Huntly. It's causing us major problem. In fact, we've had a 30.1% increase in the last measured period from those emissions. So all the great work to decarbonise using electricity is offset by the fact that we're using more and more Indonesian coal. So if ammonia is produced very quickly, it probably needs to go into boiler fuel in Huntly, to be perfectly clear about that. So we are on the right pathway and we're making significant progress. I have to say that you can't walk the talk. If you can't walk the talk, you shouldn't be talking. And as an organisation, we this year will achieve 70% carbon neutrality. We were 45% last year, and we expect to be carbon neutral by 2025. And we independently certify that carbon neutrality. So, briefly, keep it sweet, short. Climate change is a reality. We have a plan. Carbon costs are going to continue, and market barriers are going to also increase. We can achieve net zero by 2050, but it requires everybody pitching in to do that. 90% of all investment in decarbonisation is NPV positive. So for those that don't think it's worth investing, think again. The economics are quite different. Fossil fuel availability will decline and alternatives are required. And to Sir Tiffany's point yesterday, if hydrogen isn't the answer, what is? I have to say I'm a little bit biased because I'm chairman of the New Zealand Hydrogen Council, so I've got to... Energy efficiency is a reality moving forward. We need to think about the effects of intermittent energy on our grid, and maybe we have to get some run-of-river hydro occurring again within New Zealand, in modified rivers, that is. Practical implementation of better building standards is a necessity, and really mapping a sound pathway forward for our energy planning is critically important, but also socialising the fact that we have a need for renewable energy, and for some communities this will mean windmills and other devices in the landscape. So we have to be very clear about that, and we have to plan to have that in play. But that's it from me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and there may be an opportunity for questions later.
Good morning. I'm grappling a little bit with an issue at the moment in that some of you know I was living temporarily, I grew up in Southland, was living temporarily in Wellington for a decade or two or three, and I've just come back here. I thought I was coming back to grow veggies and see a big sky and talk to my wife a bit more. And this morning I discovered that I've been roped into Terry Nichols' mafia. So I'm not really quite sure whether I'm a hitman or a foot soldier or whatever, but I think at this stage, as you can choose what you identify at these days, I think I'm going to choose to be a foot soldier. I think that's sort of, I don't have a gun licence, although I understand that's not really required for a hitman. Quite a lot of my presentation has been covered in various ways, so I'm going to adjust a little bit what I'm saying here and there. So one of the things I'm going to start by talking about two experiences. I was reflecting on Rod Jury's presentation yesterday as I was driving home, and I realised that in 2019 I was in Zermatt, which is the tourism town close to the Matterhorn, and there's no cars there. And this is the sort of stuff that Rod was talking about. So I went home and I Googled how many tourists visit Zermatt, and it's 2.2 million in a year. I Googled how many visit Queenstown, and it's 1.3. So suddenly you start, when you look into some of the facts, some of these things that sound a bit fanciful actually maybe have another dimension. So you know, the requirement for us to think laterally is very fundamental. The other experience I want to talk about is 2008, when I ran the Electricity Commission, and we had 2 really low rainfall years, and by about midwinter I was getting a call from the Minister for Energy every second day saying, how's it going, moving? Are we maintaining our lake? Are we going to survive? And I would say things like, well, maybe, we might survive. This wasn't a very easy time, and by late in the winter I have to say that there was some odd sleepless night. One day I had to change the dialogue from maybe to saying to him, you need to know, yesterday I had a discussion with a system operator about the fact that the lakes on the Waitaku chain may disintegrate, and they're doing some work on how many days it is till that happens. If that was to happen, we would have lost 1,600 kilowatts of generation, which is a hell of a lot more than Huntly, and meeting supply would have been somewhere between desperate and impossible. So it's quite understandable that the electricity sector, having lived through those things, is really concerned, and sometimes there's a tendency to go to the big projects that are going to solve the problems and have a big focus on stability. I think one of the leadership challenges facing us now is to make sure we bring together those people that have the focus on stability and those people that have the lateral thinking, and create the chemistry where those two groups of people can function in a really constructive way and generate the solutions. And so the comments made earlier by Tom and Neil about the need for this ongoing strategic perspective, one of the fundamental responsibilities of such a group is to actually create the right kinds of dialogues. What am I put up there? 2 key pieces of work. Right, I can see it here now. There has been 2 key pieces of work around energy. The first is the energy strategy, which you've heard Steve talk about. And I think it's important to recognise how much work went into this, the amount of detail contribution, and a lot of that was largely overseen by Steve. The nature of that report is that it focuses on the system. And that's very valuable, and we already had good feedback from potential investors who have found the information very useful, etc., etc. We rely on them to implement. So in some ways, it's not really, if you get to the strict definition of a strategy, it's something you can implement. We're actually relying on investors to implement. It's not something that a collective Great South or anyone else can implement. The other really important piece of work is the Just Transition Clean Energy Strategy. That was largely led by Mike Shatford, who did a lot of the detail work, all again unseen and behind the scenes. The key focus on that, it was policy as opposed to the system. And I think this is a really important point. We need to recognise that we're in a big period of change. We have to manage how we think about the system and the facts of it and the policies that will make it go better. One without the other just does not work. And I think I've unfortunately, and with some disappointment, listened to some discussions about which report's the real report. Actually, you need both. And if we don't have both, we won't really make the progress. I also have to make a comment about Mike. Mike organised pretty much all of this, and I think he should be congratulated. I talked to him most days over the last few weeks. Most days he was pretty calm. The odd day he wasn't, but that was pretty understandable. I'll talk briefly about the pressure on the system. I'll preface that with saying, if you're not already understanding that we are already in a process of deep change, then your thinking's, I have to say, you need to challenge your own thinking. We are already there. It's already happening. We have to keep progress. The system's already under substantial pressure. This slide, as Steve said, decarbonisation is going to require a big demand, and as the strategy says, it highlights the need for a lot more generation, transmission and distribution. You've heard that from just about every speaker, and Jason yesterday said that New Zealand needs something like about 30 billion this decade, and remember, we're almost 3 years or a third of the way through it. BCG say we actually need about 40 billion, so the numbers kind of are approximate. The bigger picture on that is we need to decarbonise. We need these new industries that Great South's been talking about. We have possible green hydrogen. So the demand for energy is huge, and that's that's a great, fantastic opportunity for us. The future of Tiwai and Southern Green Hydrogen, I can only echo the gentleman's thoughts down here early on. We really need that uncertainty removed from the system and the thinking. It's very difficult for investors. It's very difficult for people doing policy work while that uncertainty is there. The next slide. This just gives a little bit of an insight into what will happen if Tiwai closes and the Southern Green Hydrogen developed. The red line is demand, and as you can see, by about 2030, but over 2031, we are actually going to be going above what's available, and we're going to need. That's not far off when you had yesterday generators up here talking about a 7 to 10 year development plan, critical path. The next slide is what we all see and what Nobby and many others of you see as the big opportunity where we have Tiwai and Southern Green Hydrogen. But look at when demand goes above supply. It's actually earlier, and this is why there's real urgency about getting progress. We do have the resource. This just gives you an idea of the wind sites around the country, around Southland. There's similar maps in the strategy if you go and look at them for solar and hydro. So we need the people that are thinking about building this stuff to know what's going to happen or what the platform is so they can be serious. If you're spending money for 2 years on consenting a project, you don't want to go and spend that money and then find that generation's not needed for another quite a few years. I'm going to talk briefly about some transition issues. One of the really big things we have to deal with is, and this is one of the things that creates a lot of at the centre of a lot of the electricity operators' minds, is the variable new green generation is invariably variable. Wind blows, the wind stops, the sun shines, the clouds come, and we have to deal with that. Somehow or other the system has to be kept in balance with almost exactly the same power going into it as going out of it in any moment. So that creates a big challenge for firming the system. One of the real opportunities in that is the demand side response, and Boston Consulting Group are suggesting that we could probably meet 40% of our firming requirements from demand side response. That is an enormous value to consumers and to the system. This is where I'm right behind Rod Jory about us thinking very laterally. So we've got Tiwai, and I was talking to them yesterday. They want to become more flexible. If they can respond, particularly in dry years, if we can use some of this new technology like the MPOT technology, which we can be applied to Tiwai, and it can give about a 20% response within a day. That's pretty impressive. We've got battery work going on with people like Fonterra on the Polyjoule, which is actually made out of recycled plastic. We've got metal hydride technology coming out of Germany, which is already being used around the world commercially, not to a great scale, but it's starting to be used. And according to their scientists, we could actually build that here in Southland. It's a steel box full of old steel. I don't understand the chemistry of how it all works, but it works. So this is the stuff that we have to get the focus on. And if we are saying things like, well, batteries will take another decade or another 20 years, actually, what the Germans have told us is that their energy crisis with the loss of gas has meant that a whole lot of their stuff that they thought wouldn't come out of the labs for another 4 or 5 years came out in less than 12 months. And that's just because they got together and decided that it was going to happen. Something that's not thought about a great deal is this business of the sources of capital. If you look at that slide, all of those 3 possible ways of demand-side management all are funded by private capital. If you build a big plant in the system, I won't identify which particular ones, but you can imagine some, they're paid for by the consumer. And people kind of forget this. So there is actually a big question about how we fund the transition. So I agree with Rod again that we need to think carefully about that. Big projects go straight to electricity prices. So you may well have a more stable price created by some project, but in actual fact, price might be quite a lot higher. Again, we have people like Rio who have very substantial balance sheet, and they have an interest in funding some of this transition. And they would be able to fund it at a lower cost than public capital. So we need to really, this is not a philosophical debate about whether stuff's public ownership or private ownership or any of that stuff, or neoliberalism or any of that nonsense. This is practical thinking about how we make concrete progress, where the money comes from and how we get that low-cost renewable. One of the biggest costs in building renewable generation is in actual fact the financing cost. The regulatory framework. I'm going to use up my time in a moment. I better keep moving. We have to build renewable generation. It's quite different, as we know. It's highly variable. We have to manage peak in the system. We have to deal with dry years, and we have to build the network. All of those things interact. Nothing is separate in the electricity system. The electrons kind of go everywhere. The physics determine that this is all interconnected, and we can't deny the physics. To move the regulatory forward system quickly, to move the regulatory system, get it developed more, and people talked a lot about the need for that yesterday, we actually need our best brains. And we need to get them in a room yesterday, because it is a very tricky process working through regulatory requirements not to create unforeseen circumstances, keep the stability that I was talking about earlier on, that's essential for an electricity system, but also do things different. And this is a very fundamental part of it. I'm aware that there's some thinking in some quarters that we actually should leave the sort of strategic plan and some of this to the electricity sector because they know all about it. Actually, I think that would be a mistake. I think we need them deeply involved. They bring a perspective which is absolutely fundamental and a knowledge and a data. We also need people that are going to challenge their stability thinking. And we also need the network people in there as well, not just the big generators. So the task of leadership is actually, I think, creating these very effective dialogues. I'm not going to talk about my last point. It's already been talked about. My only comment I'll make there is that any region that can use its people well and get committed to their development and their quality of life has a real competitive advantage, because the shortage of our people, not just in New Zealand but internationally, is just becoming increasingly more and more apparent. And you know, the new council's focus on housing and that kind of perspective is very, very fundamental to us being able to make progress. So look, thank you very much. I hope these comments are useful for you, and I'll do my best to work well with my mafia leader. Good morning. My name's Lyndon Preble. Looking at Steve's slides there earlier, I'm becoming an increasingly rare person around Southland as I'm a sheep and beef farmer from Dipton. For those of you who aren't from around Southland, Dipton is the high point of the road between here and Queenstown. So I'm also the co-chair of the Greater Dipton Catchment Group. I'm just going to start off, just give you a really quick rundown on catchment groups. Just push the red button. Yep, sorry. I'm not used to this sort of technology. I'm usually dealing with sheep and dogs and things. There's 35 catchment groups in Southland. The first catchment group started, could be 10 or more years ago. And they came together to really try and help understand what farmers' impacts were on the environment, and to try and look for a way forward and to support each other in that process. So the catchment groups are supported by an organisation called Thriving Southland. Thriving Southland is funded by the Ministry of Primary Industries, so yes, farmers are grateful for some of the things this government has done. You might be surprised at that, but and the catchment groups are all run by volunteers, so Thriving Southland is really important to support those volunteers with the administration and the organisational aspects of running those catchment groups. Our own catchment group has been going for 2.5 years. As I said, I'm one of the co-chairs. When we started out, we thought it was really important to consult with our community. So we invited our community along to an evening. We put on a few beers and had a bit of food, which is always good for getting the conversation going. And we asked them what would they like us to do, or what would they like, to know about. So over that last 2.5 years, we've done quite a range of things. We've particularly looked at water quality issues, but we've also done stuff on looking at native plant regeneration, waste reduction and recycling, and now we're moving on to looking at our current project, which is what I was going to talk to you about, which is our looking at climate change. When we first had our community consultation, we obviously had a lot of ideas come out of that. So we had to sit down and kind of sieve through them. And I suggested then that we do a project around climate change. But nobody else agreed with me, so I lost that argument. So it kind of sat on the back burner for about 1.5 years or so, while we did a lot of other stuff around water quality and those other things. So our project that we're doing at the moment is called Carbon Neutral Dipton, but in a way, actually the technical name is, and I'll have to read this out, is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Sequestration Project. But our media advisor told us that Carbon Neutral Dipton would grab a bit more attention, and it has. Anyway, our project, basically how it works is we've got 5 farms. We've modelled those farms using a couple of modelling programs, one called Overseer, which models the farm's emissions, and secondly a modelling program called FarmX, which is much more about the economics and the financial aspects of the farm, because we feel the two have to go hand in hand. So the farms have been modelled by a couple of consultants, and then we've in the process of now modelling quite a range of mitigations and options on those farms. So I can't give you any results because that process is still happening, but you can follow us on Facebook or our website and find out the results, or come to our field day in July, when we will be talking about those results. One of the cool things about the project was, apart from all the learning that's been going on, is that it was suggested by our catchment group coordinator that we incorporate buddy groups around each of our farmers. So
these 5 farms, 3 of them are sheep and beef farms, 2 of them are dairy farms. Each of them have invited 3, 4, 5 of their neighbours or friends who are farming similar types of farm along to their farm. So those buddy group farmers kind of try and understand the farm, and then have had a bit of a brainstorm, a bit of a discussion about what's going on, and come up with some ideas, which is where the ideas for this modelling has come from. So, as I said, we've employed a couple of consultants, one a farm management consultant, one a forestry ETS consultant, because we've obviously got to look at the forestry aspect, particularly on the hill country farms. And yeah, I think the thing is that what we're trying to do is really look for the opportunities. We're trying to be positive and practical and ground up driven. So these are farmer driven practical ideas around how we can make our farms work into the future and meet the challenges of climate change. As I said, we have attracted a bit of media attention, and if you want to find out more about it, we have a Facebook page, and Thriving Southland host a website page for us. Yeah, so I'll just finish off by talking about our next steps. So I believe that one of the things that will come out of this project and all the analysis and the discussion around it all will be a lot more questions and a lot more ideas. So I think the project will continue on into the future. The second aspect that we've just started having a discussion about is with an organisation called the Tauha Group, and that's around looking at the voluntary environment market. It's a pretty new concept to me, but kind of a bit like the Trade Me of environmental credentials. So we're quite excited about that because we understand that there is interest from commercial companies and overseas and in New Zealand to support things going on farms that are good for the environment. So this process is something that we're going to explore a bit further with the Tauha Group as a sort of follow-on part of our project. So yeah, sorry, I think I've got to flick through a couple of slides, but anyway, that's it. Thank you very much anyway.
All right, morning everyone, and yeah, great to see you tackling that complex challenge of dealing with those on-farm emissions. Yeah, I'm Richard Gray, so I look after our 2 manufacturing sites in the Lower South Island. So we've got our site just down the road at Edendale and another site up in Otago at Balclutha. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Fonterra's decarbonisation journey, particularly focused on process heat. So they're the, I guess, energy we use and the emissions that result from collecting and processing our milk from our farmers. So I guess we've been on a journey for a number of years. We started focusing particularly on energy intensity. So back in 2003, Fonterra set a target of reducing our energy intensity by 20% by 2020. So we achieved that target. So that's essentially for every tonne of dairy products we make, we're now using 20% less energy to make that tonne of dairy products than we did back in 2003. So you could say that's a tick. I'll probably go a little bit off. Well, I can't go off record in a crowd this big, but so that's a good thing. But it's actually not such a good thing given how much our business grew between 2003 and I guess up to around about 2018, where we grew by nearly 60%. So while our intensity reduced, our absolute emissions increased quite significantly. So we then, back in 2000, I think it was 17, we set an ambition to reduce our absolute emissions by 2030. So that's where most of our focus is at the moment, is on what do we need to do to get the absolute emissions or the tonnes of CO2 from our processing down by 30% compared to 2018 by 2030. We've got a good plan, we're on track to achieve that. And then looking further out is that aspiration of being carbon neutral by 2050, which aligns to what Steve talked about and our national aspirations. Just down in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see where our process heat emissions largely come from. You can see there it's largely coal, so over 50% of our process heat emissions come from coal. And of that, and I'll just flick to the next slide, you'll see on this map the dark blue circles are predominantly in the South Island, and one of those largest circles is in Murihiku here at our site at Edendale. So we've got a very local and clear challenge to decarbonise our process heat. So what I just want to talk about now is just, I guess, our approach to how we're approaching this. So primarily we're looking in the first instance around how do we use less energy. All right, so decarbonising is going to be a real challenge. If we decarbonise the way we operate now, we'll be spending a lot of capital to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy, but at a larger quantity than we need to. So we're really focused on technology around using less. So we're investing heavily in feasibility studies around heat recovery, heat pumps, and then alternative technologies such as storage. So heat recovery, we've been on a journey just purely from an economic perspective, not so much around emissions, to reduce our energy. And we've got quite a good track record of it at our site at Edendale of continually finding ways to decrease our energy use. And in the last 3 years, we've reduced our annual coal usage by about 7,000 tonnes, just purely by looking at inefficient use of waste heat and how we can use that more efficiently. So we're making some good progress. With heat pumps, we've got 2 technologies we're looking at the moment. One is around hot water heat pumps, so that'll take waste heat and generate hot water at somewhere between 85 and 95 degrees. So it'll be using electricity as a driving force to upcycle that energy. And we've recently entered into a partnership with MAN, which is a European company with technology in oil and gas that will be able to take waste heat and generate medium pressure steam. So that's steam that will give us usable heat at about 160 degrees. And we think that'll allow us to retire probably 2 of our boilers out at the Edendale site by putting those 2 technologies in. So they're options we're looking at the moment. I'll just touch a little bit on the new technologies. So I think Mervyn talked about our plastic batteries. So we've got a partnership that we're running with MIT around developing this battery, and it's called, company's called Polyjoule. We've got one of these batteries installed at a facility in the Waikato, and we're largely using that at the moment to manage power quality. So where we have power flicks, power spikes, this technology allows us to keep our factories operational with the absence of short-term outages from the grid. And this technology we've put in, if I remember rightly, it can handle a power outage of about 1 to 2 minutes, which is actually quite a significant outage. Allows us to keep our processes running. But we can see future uses for this technology as we start to look at things like decarbonising our tanker fleet. If we move towards electric vehicles, one of our challenges is going to be recharging the vehicles. So we're looking at the idea of having distributed charging, potentially on farm, and maybe using these batteries to take some renewable energy or take out manage peak loads of energy on farm, store it and use it to charge our tankers. So it's quite exciting, very much in its early days, but just shows some of the technologies that are available. And then I guess on to the next slide, which is about us emitting less. So once we've done what we can economically to reduce our energy requirements, it's then looking at emitting less. So we've got a number of projects underway around wood biomass, and something I'm quite proud of. On Monday, we have put steam from our new biomass boiler at our Stirling site just up in Balclutha across to the cheese plant, and that factory is the first Fonterra factory that's now on 100% renewable energy for process heat. So that cheese can't quite say it's carbon zero because we've still got a lot of other energy that goes into the collection of milk and that sort of thing. But it's really exciting that we've now got essentially no more coal being used on that site. So that's pretty cool. We've got another project up in the Waikato at Waitoa. We were building a new biomass boiler there, a 30 megawatt boiler. That'll be commissioned in August. So that'll be another site that'll be very close to being out of coal. And we've got some other projects we've done in the past around conversion of boilers to burn wood pellets, such as at Te Amutu. So we're making some really good progress, but we've still got a very long way to go, as you would have seen on that previous slide. Also looking at other options around biogas. So we've got a biodigester at our site at Darfield that's currently wasting methane, where the next step of that is then how do we capture that methane and use it to recover the energy out of it and use it in our process. And then also looking at options for use of electricity through our vehicles, such as our tankers, looking at where electricity can play a role in managing some of our process heat peaks and variations, and other things. So we're making I think we're making good progress. We're challenging ourselves to really accelerate what we can do, because we know 2037 it's going to come around pretty quick. But also as having a target like that, is that actually aspirational enough, and is that going fast enough? So we're looking at a number of other technologies, particularly now with a number of new fuels being available, where we may be able to, and it won't be quite as simple as this, but essentially take a new type of fuel and use it in our existing boilers with very little modification. And if we can get that off the ground, if we can get that supply chain running, that will really allow us to bring that change forward. So yeah, very excited, and thanks for the opportunity to share that with you today. Appreciate that. Cheers.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. We've had some really good discussions about our plan forward, energy strategies, some really good initiatives that are already in play. I see morning tea is served, so I won't take long. I just wanted to thank Murahikure Generation for putting on this event, bringing in the discussions, bringing in the opportunities to have these discussions so that we can move forward. Mike, in particular, for organising such a significant event. We know how much time and effort goes into that. And for all of you, for giving up your time to be here today and contribute towards these discussions, which is definitely going to see us progressing forward. Thank you, everyone.